Well, good morning. Welcome to the Issues class. We've got Lynette Chappell Williams here, and she's Penn State's new Chief Diversity Officer at Penn State, which I guess is a newly created position this year. And she's a lawyer by training and has worked through a variety of positions and was at Cornell most recently doing not exactly sure what she was doing at Cornell because I forget already. Unfortunately, Kristen was introducing her and she had this all kind of hammered out. But we had initiated a reading program from the mission committee for Foose Elementary School because we wanted to have some sort of a replacement for the library, the teachers, the people, our mission committee people, and others going in and being classroom assistants and reading and everything. And so Carol Schneiderite was very instrumental in putting together the reading program for Foose, which centered on having library books and then having people from a variety of backgrounds reading their favorite book and showing themselves in Zoom sessions that were recorded to the elementary school children. And Lynette was very helpful in finding people at the medical center to help us have that happen. And we're finding that the program's been very successful and everyone's very pleased about it. So Lynette, I will let you talk about your subject, which is titled Unintended Consequences, the Impact of Microaggressions. And we're very happy to have you this morning.
Great. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Good morning, everyone, and happy Sunday to you. I'm really happy to be able to have this conversation with you. And I will say that I have been so impressed with your church in terms of having these types of conversations. They're so important to create the sense of community and for people to feel like, they're actually connected in. So we're going to be having this conversation about microaggressions. And I want to start off by saying that it's going to be important for us to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. When you talk about unconscious bias and microaggressions, and I'll define both of those later, it's really difficult because it forces us to think about how we interact with other individuals and what our own feelings are about various topics, individuals, and groups. So it says we need to ask ourselves tough questions in terms of understanding, why do I feel this particular way about this particular group? What information have I used to form my impressions of them? And then when we ask these questions, it gives us an opportunity to rethink the systems that can unintentionally perpetuate bias in the church and as well as in our community. So this is a good time to sort of step back and say, all right, I know this is how I've normally interacted. Maybe I need to think about this and to feel good about the fact that you're rethinking how you interact. So let's start with what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a definition of what unconscious bias and microaggressions are. And then what I thought would be helpful is that we go through some scenarios and have a conversation about how you would respond. What would your natural response be? And then to share some responses that would actually be what I'll call best practice types of responses. And then I'll just take a quick minute just to give you an idea about some resources that are available, because I do want to make sure we have some time for discussion. And I was telling Marilyn and Jack that my Zoom's church service starts at 10. And so I don't want to be late for that. So let's get started. Here's something that's important in terms of why we work on these issues. If we have injustice anywhere, it's going to be a threat to justice everywhere. And the significance of that is that if we're interacting with individuals in such a way that they don't feel valued or they feel like they're not as important, it doesn't impact just that individual. It impacts much more broadly in terms of our entire community. So it's why it's important to understand these topics and the kinds of things that we can do to avoid behaviors that create this sense of injustice. I'm going to start at the very basic because sometimes we may have different impressions about terminology. So let's start when we talk about diversity and inclusion, because those are concepts that are important. And when we start getting to the unconscious bias and microaggressions, diversity is basically how we are all different. And it can be a number of different factors. So it's about what makes people different. When we talk about inclusion, it's how the practices, the interactions that we have with groups or individuals who are from different backgrounds, and we do it in such a way that they feel welcome and respected, and they feel like they're being treated in an equal way compared to other individuals. So it's basically creating that sense of belonging, empowering people to appreciate the differences that we all bring. And when I talked about the differences, here's the broad range, and this is not everything. So we are all diverse in some kind of way, whether it's from an educational perspective, it can be in terms of our family structure, in terms of our religion, our age. These, like, it's more than just race, ethnicity, and gender, which is what people generally think about when they think about diversity. It is really much broader than that. So here's something that's kind of interesting, and that is whether we are talking about on a national level, on a regional level, or even here in our fabulous Hershey, there is a shift that is taking place. It's driven based on national trends, but it is filtering through throughout like the communities as well. If we look at the entire United States, women now represent almost 51% of the population. And that's expected to continue over the course of the next few years. If we look at things from a racial ethnic perspective, 25% of children under the age of 5 in the US are Hispanic. By 2050, that percentage will be almost 40%. And the fascinating thing is that US Census Bureau is predicting that by 2050, there will no longer be a majority racial group, that there will be this dispersion that takes place in terms of all the different racial groups so that there won't be one that's a majority anymore. The fascinating thing about that is that the prediction is that it's probably going to happen much earlier. Last count, they said it was really 2042 rather than 2050. And the Census Bureau is collecting the information now. So we should know something within the next year, because what we know is that for public schools across the country, there's already a 50-50 in terms of population that traditionally has been defined as white compared to those that have traditionally been defined as minority populations. So this is a trend that we're going to be seeing. Something else to point out, and I know that you've had a conversation about this before, is that the millennial or Gen Y population, and this also filters into the Gen Z population, which is right behind, a number of that population is starting to identify as LGBT. That when we look at 2012, it was about almost 6%. By 2017, it was a little over 8%. So that's a continuing shift that's taking place that makes this conversation about bias and microaggressions more important. So here's some definitions for you. The first one, bias or discrimination, and we're talking about conscious bias or discrimination, which is basically a prejudice that we might have in favor of or against a thing, person, or a group compared with another that's usually in the way that's considered unfair. So it can be held by an individual, it can be held by a group, it can be held by a community, but it generally it has negative consequences, sometimes positive, but it's generally negative consequences. The implicit or unconscious bias is what I refer to as the information that's in the back of our head. It's social stereotypes that we may have about a certain groups of individuals that we form outside of our own conscious awareness. They can be both favorable and unfavorable. They are activated involuntarily, so we're not even aware of the fact that these different ideas or perceptions are forming our opinions or forming the basis of a decision. And it's interesting because we may say, I'm a fair person, I don't have biases, and these unconscious biases actually contradicts this. We all have biases, unconscious biases. That's just the way our brains are wired to be able to take information and sort of put it into a way that we then understand it. And so we rely on prior experiences, information that we have received in the past to form those particular types of opinions. So let's do a little exercise here. What I'm going to ask you to do is to think about how to use a single unbroken line to change the following number from 9 to 6. So I'm going to give you, about 10 seconds to kind of think about how you would do that. Okay, so anyone come up with an idea in terms of how to do this?
Move the 1 over to the on the other side of the X.
Move the 1 over to the other side. Okay.
Oh no, that's 11. Excuse me, sorry.
I was waiting for someone to say, well, the number is a little
No,
off.
you need to move one line to make it V.
Yeah, no, it was a good try though. Good try. Any other thoughts?
Add S.
You got it.
Oh,
So now, and here's the interesting thing. Our brain started trying to figure out how to do, like take a line to take what was already there, as opposed to adding something different. That was the unconscious bias that was in effect, because it was trying to figure out, here's the information that I have in the back. Here's how I'm going to do this. And this is how unconscious biases take place, is that we see something and then we make a decision about it based on information that we already have. Unconscious bias and microaggressions are connected because microaggressions is the way that we act on that unconscious bias. So it's everyday verbal, nonverbal, environmental types of slights, snubs, or insults. They're usually unintentional, but they can communicate hostility. They can be derogatory or negative towards a particular individual or a group of individuals. And there's a quote that Dr. Montenegro, who is at Seattle's Children's Hospital, shares, that a microaggression isn't about having your feelings hurt. It's about how being repeatedly dismissed and alienated and insulted and invalidated reinforces the differences in power and privilege, and how this perpetuates racism and discrimination. It can also perpetuate sexism, homophobia, xenophobia. It's a way that, regardless of the type of difference, that we create this sort of a difference. The way that I've heard people describe microaggression is that it's being cut by 1,000 paper cuts. That's the kind of thing that is, these things can sort of happen repeatedly. So let's look at some examples. And these are all examples of microaggressions that people may think of as being a compliment, but actually can have a negative impact. And again, it's based on those unconscious biases. So the first one, and we have an Asian woman, and someone asked her, can you see as much as white people, because of your eyes? So the unconscious bias is that because her eyes have a different shape from what we might expect, that that she can't see as well. So the unconscious bias is, you must not be able to see in the same way because your eyes are different. The second example we have is when I gave a speech about racism, the MC introduced me as Jamie Garcia. My name is Jamie Rodriguez. Not all Latinos have the last name Garcia. So once again, the unconscious bias was, okay, this is someone who's from a Hispanic, Latinx is the term we use now, background. So Rodriguez is the name for the individual, but Garcia is the name I always think about. So this is another example. Here's a third example. You're really pretty for a dark-skinned girl. So here, the unconscious bias is, if you are someone who's dark-skinned, you generally won't be considered pretty. It's someone who's a lighter complexion is who you would normally think of as pretty. So the fact that this person has a dark skin is considered pretty. It's not something that you would sort of expect. So again, and in all of these examples, if the person, if you ask the person, are you exhibiting conscious bias or discrimination, they would say, absolutely not. And if they were told that each one of these examples are offensive or problematic, they would probably be mortified because that was not their intent. It was either just making a question or asking a question or making what they thought was a compliment. And that's the interesting thing about microaggressions is that the intent might be to compliment or to be positive, but as in this example, it can have the exact opposite effect. So here's some ways that we can foster inclusion or basically undermine the impact of microaggressions. One of them is to educate, individuals that if someone says something or asks a question, to kind of like say, you just asked this particular question, or you just made this statement. Can I share with you some facts that sort of go against what you were thinking? The other thing that can be done is to interrupt, to recognize the fact that words have impact. So if someone has said something that would rise to the point of being a microaggression, to say, excuse me, I think that what I just heard you say was, and then repeat it and to kind of share, I think that you may not have meant it, but that's something that might be considered, offensive or hurtful, to someone. The third thing that can be done is to what we call echo. So if someone intervenes when there has been a microaggression, that they speak up to support that individual, because it's hard sometimes to bring an issue like that forward. So if someone says, and we'll use the example in terms of asking the Asian woman about, whether she can see, if someone says, why would you ask that question? It wouldn't seem like there would be an issue in terms of being able to see. To echo, you would say, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was wondering, why did you ask that question? So I'm glad that this person brought that up. Inquire is another way we can do it, is to ask the person to elaborate on what they have just said or done. One of the examples that can come up is that someone will ask an individual, where are they from? And when they put, when they say, they give the answer, and the unconscious bias is you look like you might be from somewhere else. So I'm trying to figure out what that is. The person says, no, where are you really from? This is a good time in terms of making the inquiry to say, why did you ask that question? You've never asked me that question. So what was it that you were, what information are you trying to get by asking the question? And then the last thing we can do is that when an individual has experienced a microaggression, offer support to them. Pull them aside afterwards and say, I'm really sorry you just had that experience. We're all working in terms of trying to make sure we're not engaging in these types of interactions. If there's anything I can do to help you, just let me know what that is. So these are different ways in terms of creating that sense of inclusion, which is a way we can sort of mitigate the impact of microaggressions. So let's start. This is when I'm going to ask you to unmute because I'd like for you to participate at this point. So here's the first example of a microaggression. And this piggybacks on what I had just said earlier, where, someone asks another person, where are you from? They answer Reading, Pennsylvania. And then their next question is, but where are you really from? How would you respond to that? And I see all of you, so I can just call on you. So help others out by volunteering.
Well, I can say one thing that I think it's always struck me as really strange. I've lived now in this Hershey area, because I live about 4 miles north of the church, since 1975. And yet, if someone says, where am I from? I always reference my hometown about 40 miles north of here. And it's, I've thought of it a number of times. It really makes me laugh, because I think it's a central Pennsylvania thing, but I could be wrong. I've lived in Germany and I've visited a lot of countries around the world, but where am I really from takes me back to Sunbury. So I don't know what that means.
Okay. How would others respond to this? And I'm giving you the answer here is you can say, I'm curious, what makes you ask that? What are your ideas in terms of how you would respond to that?
It's a question I ask a lot because I work at the Hershey Story.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see people coming in, I just try to figure out, are they from the immediate area, that is New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania, or are they from some Western or other area? And that covers, and I get a myriad of nationalities that come up the steps. I mean, we get everything from European to Asian, and many Asians and many Europeans right now with definite accents are coming out of New York and New Jersey. That's not my next question. I just asked where they're from. I'm only trying to figure out, are we drawing from a local crowd or a remote crowd? And so I never take the second step. There was a time when I probably would have, but I'm trying to grow a little bit better in my old age. So I never take the second step, even though I can tell it's not somebody that's local. Because in many people today, you could be talking to a second and third generation. Their English is perfect. So going that second step is, to me, really an insult.
You're absolutely right. And I just want to clarify, asking an individual where they are from, that is absolutely fine to do. It's just that if they don't answer the way you think they should, because you're looking at them and saying, I really think you might be from somewhere else. It's going to that, but where are you really from? That becomes the problem. The first question, where are you from? Totally fine. And then just leave at that. So,
Lynette.
Yes.
Yeah, Lynette, I was trying to think of a different way to ask the second question that instead of makes it sound like you're questioning the person, but gets at really what the question asker is really trying to get at. So maybe saying something like, is there an ethnic, background or culture that's important to you? Because if you're trying to find out about the person and if there are things that are important to them that they value or that they want to express, then maybe a question like that is a little bit like puts a more positive spin on it.
You're absolutely right. It could, if it's a question that you ask of every single person.
Yeah.
Right. Or if you say, I'm trying to get some information because we have a program, we want to make sure that we're responsive in terms, so you give an explanation first as to why you're asking for the information, then they understand the context, right? Then it's not based on, you're thinking you should be answering in a different way, but I'm looking for some specific information because of something we're trying to accomplish. That works as well.
Hey, Lynette.
Yeah.
Marie, I've lived here 20 some years, but my heritage is from the South. I still get a little annoyed when people would say to me, where are you from? I'd say, well, Camp Hill, Mechanicsburg. And I'd still get, oh yeah, but where really? And I'm annoyed when it's like a clerk in the store. It's like, I don't want to disclose that much about myself to you. I really, other people I'm in a relationship, I'm fine, but I don't want to tell you right now. And so I get some of the being annoyed that's a privacy issue. Like I don't want you to know right now. So I'll usually do something else, but I kind of get it. Like I want to answer the way I want to and just accept that.
Exactly. And we take into account the context, right? If it's someone that you know well, that you interact with on a regular basis, like if they push in terms of that question, your comfort zone is much higher, right? But if it's not someone that you interact with on a regular basis, or this is the first time you've interacted with them, or if you've said, I don't want to, I don't know you well enough to share, any more information, then that is, an issue. So, all right. So that's this is a good example. This is one that I hear constantly from people who are from different ethnic backgrounds, national origins. So this is a question that they get, and it's that unconscious bias of, you don't look like, you're from this area, so you must be from somewhere else. That's the unconscious bias. All right, so let's go to the next example. Person says, when I look at you, I don't see race. All right, so how would you respond if you were in an interaction where you heard someone say that? What is the unconscious bias that's driving this microaggression?
The fact that they said it means they see race. It's kind of a self-fulfilling question.
That's exactly right.
That's what I was thinking too, that why would you mention race if you weren't already noticing race?
That's exactly right. So in the back of their mind, they're saying you are different, and maybe I shouldn't acknowledge that you're different. And so here's the the response. So here's something that can be shared in this particular scenario. You can say more about that, in terms of trying to understand what they meant, or can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Or it sounds like you have a strong opinion about this. Tell me why. So remember we were talking about sort of getting more information. That was one of the ways that we can respond to microaggressions. This is an example in terms of doing that, in terms of helping the person to understand that what they have just said is problematic, but giving them the opportunity to come to that point. So if they they come back and say, well, I don't, then that's when we use the education part of the way we can respond, is to say, well, the reality is, our organization, our country is made up of people from different races. So, it's fine to recognize that we do have those differences. So what do you have any thoughts in terms of, if this you're in this situation, how you would have responded?
Yeah, Lynette, this is Christy.
Hi, Christy.
Hi, I was going to say, I really appreciate your responses there, because I've been in situations where friends of family members seem to make a great point of when there's any discussion regarding race. I've got a friend who's Black, and he doesn't even seem Black, or I don't think about him as Black, but it's clearly on their mind. And I never really, it offends me, but I've never really known what to say. So it's, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. And that is one that that I've heard as well from individuals. So, the way to respond is, okay, so remember we have these different ways in terms of responding. So you can sort of inquire, why is it that you said that? What is it that generated that response from you? So, or you can sort of educate them, so you can kind of go through based on the circumstances to intervene. And I cannot stress enough how you can contribute to creating a better environment when you intervene or step in when these types of things happen. Quite often, this kind of an interaction happens and people are like, I don't know what to do. And so there's this silence that comes about. That silence basically says you condone that behavior. So it's important when it happens, even if you don't know exactly what to say, what you can do is to ask a question. What did you mean by that? Or why did you make that statement? Or why did you ask that question? It gives you some time to kind of step back and say, ooh, now what do I do? But we pointed out the 5 ways that you can respond, right? So you can get to a point where you sort of learn those. The important thing is that you step in some way. So any other ideas in terms of this example?
Lynette, Sally McKinney. I was going to say that when you make that, you answer, why did you say that? What you'll probably do is get a defensive answer. And what do you do then? That raises somebody, well, why are you even saying that to me? Then how do you handle that? That's maybe keeps me from saying something.
Yeah, so because we want to keep this respectful, because the person didn't necessarily intend, to be offensive or hurtful. So if they come back and they say, well, why did you ask me that question? You can say, because, my experience is that's the kind of a question or statement that can be hurtful. So I was just trying to understand, what was your basis for asking the question or making the statement?
Okay, thank you.
Does that help? So
yeah, thank you.
Any other thoughts on this?
This is Patty Hipschman, and there's forms that I need to fill out that ask me am I Caucasian, am I Islander, Pacific Islander, or that's always sort of bothered me.
It depends on, I will say that a lot of organizations collect that kind of information. It's a way to understand if you are, if you have programs, if you have processes that are responsive to the different populations. So that's a perfectly appropriate thing to do in terms of asking, just kind of collecting, that information so you understand who makes up a particular community, so that okay, if we have this percentage of individuals who are from this particular background, are the services that we provide, going to be responsive to their needs? So, and you always have the option of not answering that. So, other questions, other thoughts?
And then I think one of the things that makes this question tough is I think kind of we have maybe as a national expectation that the idea of ending racism is that we pretend we don't see it, that we ignore it, and that somehow like this answer was saying, hey, I'm not racist, I don't see race. Where actually it's to appreciate the differences that we have and to respect them and to to hold them up. So I think some ways this this comment that's put out is really kind of reflective of maybe more of a national kind of misguidance, or we're aiming for maybe the wrong target.
Right. And this is a statement that people think this one and, my best friend is XYZ. Those are both statements that are designed that they're thought of as being compliments, but they actually take into account, it's not even just that you see as different, you see difference in a negative way. And so you're basically trying to compensate for it. Yeah. All right. So let's go on to the next one. You have to cover your head. It's too bad that women are so oppressed in your culture. How would you respond to that? This is clearly someone who wears like a hijab as part of their culture. Any thoughts?
Matt, this is Andrew Barna. I might ask or say that, I know that, different religions and cultures have different reasons. Their mode of dress, and it expresses some different things to people, and maybe ask, maybe to help with the conversation, like, why, what is this an expression for you, or why is it, back to the questioner, why is it important? What are you trying to get at in understanding, why this person is dressing this way or something?
Exactly. To ask, why do you feel that way, right? It's that, again, using that inquiry opportunity, education opportunity. So here's what could be the response. Tell me more about why you think that. Why do you think women are oppressed in that religion? So it's, again, using the opportunity for the individual to sort of say, ooh, wait a minute, maybe what I just asked was not the best thing in terms of the question. And so then you can have a dialogue. You also create a more comfortable environment for the person who is the recipient of this question and statement, to give them some time to kind of regroup themselves so that they can then contribute to the conversation. Like I said, many times individuals, when they experience a microaggression, they are so shocked or stunned. They don't know what to say immediately. They need some time to process. So when you intervene, it gives them an opportunity to kind of step back and sort of go, okay, all right, and then to be able to contribute to the conversation. Any other thoughts about this?
I'm not getting this. I'm not.
Okay, so let me share some.
Can I just jump in, Lynette? What I'm starting to think about and realize is that the important role that people that are like myself, that I'm not asking the question, but I'm hearing the question being answered, is to really step in and be an advocate and, I don't know, redirect. So not to make it the person who's being, addressed or questioned, make it their responsibility to, teach the person that's questioning, that maybe this isn't the, best way to get at whatever it is you want to know. Maybe that question about wearing hijab is about really just trying to understand the religion, but you're not doing it the right way.
Yeah, that was a perfect way to sort of describe what it is that we're trying to do. And the term we use for that is upstanding. So an ally is just someone that, you sort of support an effort. Bystander is where you see or something happens and you don't intervene. Upstanding is when you actually do intervene. And like I said, that's the important thing for us to start shifting in our environment so that we create this more welcoming, respectful type of environment for regardless of people's different backgrounds. And so the more that we intervene and don't require that individual who is the recipient of the microaggressions to basically have to defend themselves, the better we have, because that person who asked that question, they will think twice before they ask that question again. Or if they do ask a question or make a statement, they will quite often self-correct. Like they may say, no, where are you really from? And then go, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked that question, right? That's what we want to do, is to get to a point where people think before they make these comments or ask questions that are based on those microaggressions or that constitute microaggressions because they're based on unconscious bias, to get them to kind of think about it. And then once they realize that they have said something based on a prior experience, they know, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have asked that question. Other thoughts? So let me share some resources with you very quickly, and then I'll leave it open if you have any other questions. One of the things I would highly recommend, if you have not done so, is to take what's called the implicit association test. It's one through Harvard University. If you go online and Google Harvard University implicit bias, unconscious bias, these tests will come up. And there's several tests based on the different aspects of diversity. So you can take each one of them, and it just takes a few minutes. It gives you an idea in terms of where you may have unconscious biases. We call them blind spots because we don't realize that this is an area that we're using information that may not be accurate in terms of how we're making decisions. So I'd highly recommend that if you haven't done that, you do so. It's free and you can take all of the tests that are offered. It's like I said, it's based on different aspects of race, it's on religion. It encompasses about 20 different areas or 20 different tests. So you literally can take all of them in terms of understanding how to approach things. And then in terms of understanding, how you can sort of build this sort of understanding of how to be an upstander, there's something called a guide to allyship. And so if you Google that, it'll come up and it'll give you ideas in terms of how do you intervene over and above what we shared earlier today. Teaching tolerance is another great example of something that will help in terms of understanding
I don't have to get back.
that might come up and ways that you can intervene. So, and then there are a number of movies that that have this. And so I'll make sure that this information is shared at the end. So any questions that you might have at this point? Or do you now feel you are an expert in terms of addressing microaggressions, exactly what to do when one occurred?
I don't. This is Sandy, and I made a microaggression at work recently. Actually, I made a couple, but one, I did reach out to the person and afterwards and say, hey, can I Zoom? Can I Zoom with you later? I really want to apologize for what happened. And it's the person though said, oh, it's really nothing. And I was like, well, I really am sorry. And I know I have a lot to learn. And but I still, I still feel like I hurt her. I don't know if I apologized sufficiently.
So Sandy, if I can offer this, this suggestion, you did the right thing by reaching out to apologize. Just make sure the apology doesn't come across as you're trying to defend what you.
Yeah.
So I think you're saying, I thought about, what I said. I realized that was not the most respectful thing to say, and I just want to apologize. And then you're done. You don't have to say anything more. The person will likely say it's not a big deal or don't worry about it, because people that deal with microaggressions, they're just trained to know, shouldn't make a big thing about this because this person will then say, well, you're being overreacting. Number of different responses, right? So if the individual responds back, don't worry about it, or it didn't bother me, it bothered them, right? But they've just learned, that they want to move on. So, but you did the right thing by reaching out. And I would advise all of you that if you kind of think about it and went, oh my goodness, what I just did was a microaggression, let that person know, I thought about what I just said. That was not the best thing to say. I apologize. And then you're done. Don't try to explain, well, and the reason because then that comes into looking defensive at that point. So you just, I realized I shouldn't have said, I apologize, period, done.
I Googled it first to see.
Good for you. Good for you.
But I also want to share in case it helps other people. This almost the same day, I was on a Zoom with like 100 lawyers, our bar association, and the president judge was on and said something about one of his children who was a nurse in the ICU. And I assumed it was a female wrongly. So, I mean, some of you who know me would not think me, but totally wrong.
That's an unconscious bias, right? Because that information in the back of our head says if women are the ones who traditionally go into nursing. So it would be logical that you would use that information in terms of making an assumption.
But now, do I call that person and say, I'm sorry, I offended your son?
Well, did you say anything? If you were just thinking it?
No, I said something. I said, thank you so much. I bet we really appreciate her service or something like that.
Okay. You could, like if it's not a big deal to get hold of them, and this is something I would just do, like just if you have email access, I wouldn't say, okay, like let's talk about it. I would just send an email. Like if you have the email and say, look, I made an assumption. It was an incorrect assumption. I just wanted to apologize. Period. Done.
Hey,
Thanks.
Lynette, Marie here. Lauren June put a question in the chat. I don't know if Lauren's still on about her 7-year-old daughter. Is Lauren here?
Okay, a question I am left with. If I or my 7-year-old is curious about something like a woman's head covering, is it okay to ask about it? And what is the best way to do so? So as an adult, my answer is no, it's not. If the person brings it up somehow, fine. But that's what the internet is for now, right? We have access to the internet where we can do our own education. For your 7-year-old, that age group has no filters. So they're going to ask questions. And so what I would do is to say, to indicate, I apologize, for, my 7-year-old asking the question. And then the person will either say, that's okay and not say anything more, or we'll use that as an opportunity in terms of providing that education.
We are still here. Thank you for answering.
You're so welcome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I would think that how you answer that is not only informative, but it also sets a standard for your daughter to how to anticipate in the future. First off, at 7, you don't ever want kids to be afraid to ask a question about anything. And how you answer is definitely a training moment. So I would just answer as truthfully as you can, or maybe suggest if you don't know the right answer, that you look it up together so that it becomes an exercise that you can both learn from.
That's an excellent suggestion. Absolutely excellent. Other questions or comments?
Or confessions.
Or confessions. You don't have to confess if you don't want, or you can say, I heard a friend of mine do this the other day.
If there's no other questions, as Lynette said at the top, she has a church service to go to here at 10 o'clock, as in Zoom, of course. So Lynette, thank you so much for your presentation. Very informative, and the group, as usual, had great questions. So we really appreciate you being here.
My absolute pleasure.
And pray for your safety during the snowstorm. And again, you've done an excellent job, and we really appreciate you being here. And Mission and Peace Committee at church has put this together. So I want to give a shout out to Mission and Peace also. Thank you very much, Lynette. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Everyone have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Thank you.